Just as the end of one existence is marked by death, the beginning of a new existence is marked by rebirth, paṭisandhi. Paṭisandhi means taking existence again, the arising of a new life immediately following the passing away of a previous one. When a being dies and is born again in another realm, that process is called paṭisandhi. In Buddhism, this is further explained through the concepts of cuti and upati. Cuti means the separation from this life. In other words, death. Upati means arising again, or rebirth. According to the Buddha's teaching, death and rebirth occur in a dependent and continuous sequence, Paṭicca Samuppāda. But this continuity is not an unbroken existence. If it were considered unbroken, that would imply the existence of an eternal soul, which would fall into eternalism, sasata ditthi, a view held by certain Hindu and other religious teachers who believe in a permanent self or soul, Atman. Buddhism does not accept this idea. A Buddha instead explained this through the doctrine of Dependent Origination, Paṭicca Samuppāda. The connection between death and rebirth is part of the ongoing process of Samsara, the cycle of existence. The Buddha taught that karma, intentional action, is the fundamental cause that leads to rebirth. One cannot talk about rebirth without karma, or karma without rebirth. Only arahants, those who have attained final liberation, do not undergo rebirth because they have exhausted all karma. Karma means action, but in Buddhism, it does not mean a doer. It refers to intentional actions that bring corresponding results. Good actions produce good results. Bad actions bring bad results. Buddhism rejects the notion of reincarnation in the sense of a soul transmigrating from one body to another, but it accepts rebirth, Punabbhava, the arising of a new existence conditioned by karma. This principle is explained briefly in the Paṭicca Samuppāda formula. Imasmin sati, idang hoti, imasmin asati, idang na hoti. Meaning, when this exists, that comes to be. When this does not exist, that does not come to be. Rebirth, Punabbhava, means arising again. It has two interpretations. Moment to moment, the existence of a being is a continuous process of arising and passing away. After death, a new birth occurs in another existence. When people hear about rebirth, they often wonder, does it really happen? Because they interpret it in terms of a soul continuing after death. But the deeper meaning of rebirth is that existence arises moment by moment. Phenomena appear and disappear continuously. Decisions made in one moment condition those that follow. In contrast, Hinduism and similar faiths teach that there is a permanent, unchanging self, Atman, within each person. Though the physical body perishes, this self remains unchanged and migrates to another body. They liken it to changing old clothes for new ones. The body is destroyed at death, but the pure soul continues its journey and takes a new body. This view is known as eternalism, Shashvatavada. Buddhism rejects this concept of reincarnation. Reincarnation implies there is a permanent doer who acts and is reborn. But Buddhism denies the existence of such a self. In rebirth, Punabbhava, things arise not because someone causes them to, but because certain conditions give rise to others. The arising itself is conditioned, not driven by a soul, but by causal energy. To make this clearer, consider a simple story. A frog and a fish lived together in a lake as friends. One day, the frog went to explore the land. Days passed, and he did not return. When he finally came back, the fish asked, "Where have you been?" "I went to see the land," the frog replied. The fish, having never left the water, asked curiously, "What is the land like? Does it flow like water?" The frog tried his best to describe the land, the trees, the rocks, the dry ground, but the fish could only understand in terms of water. The fish imagined the land as something similar to the flowing water he knew. In the same way, rebirth is something beyond our direct experience. We try to understand it through the limited scope of our senses and worldly logic. Because of that limitation, people often fall into the misunderstanding of believing in a hidden self or soul. This is why faith in the Buddha is important. Not blind faith, but reasoned, reflective faith, akaravati saddha, developed through inquiry and understanding. The bodhisattvas themselves, in past lives, were born as animals, gods, kings, and humans in countless forms. Because of this continuity, it might appear as if a permanent self travels through lives, but in truth, what continues is not a soul, but the causal force of karma. When one thing exists, another arises. That arising is rebirth, not of a soul, but of energy conditioned by karma.